Hi, my name is Daniel Montalvo, and I work for the World Wide Web Consortium Web Accessibility Initiative. That's W3C WAI for short. I'm here to present today a resource that we are developing that's called WAI Curricula, a resource to help you develop your own courses. Have you ever encountered a lecturer who wants to teach accessibility but is not very familiar with the contents? Or an accessibility professional who wants to train in accessibility but doesn't really know how to structure the contents? Or maybe a product owner who wants to compare between different course offerings. Also, you may have encountered a procurer who wants to write specific requirements for their organization in order to get accessibility related training. These are just a couple of use cases for this resource, but there are many more that probably you can think about. So what we're trying to do with it is basically spread the word about accessibility, make accessibility more present in places where now it probably is not that present. So we want to get accessibility out there. Actually, the source for many accessibility barriers is lack of knowledge. So with this curricula, we're trying to provide ways for people to build more standard, high quality accessibility courses. We have structured the curricula with a modular approach. That means you can combine the different pieces to suit your own needs. And also, we made that based on roles. That is, we address different activities, different tasks that are performed within the design and developer team. So, for instance, if you are somebody who does some kind of web development, but also designs user interfaces and also authors a little bit of content, you can pick the different modules that we have and build a course that basically suits your needs. So we have first an introduction that sets the foundations for everybody in the team. We have also a developer's curricula that is basically focusing on markup and coding techniques. We have also a designer's curricula, mainly focusing on visual and user design or user experience, and also an author curricula that primarily focuses on content, including multimedia. Some of the parts are already published, some others are still in progress, and we are going to get to this just in a sec. Now, what's in the curricula exactly? What's the structure of the curriculum? As we say, we have modules, and within the modules, we have topics. So the modules are like the smallest part, the most essential thing you may want to teach in isolation. And within the topics, within the modules, we have the topics, which are kind of guidance to build your teaching sequence. So in the developer's curricula, we have a module on page structure, and then we have several topics on several HTML elements, such as headings or regions or paragraphs. If you're familiar with accessibility and you've taught those elements many times, you can decide actually how you want to teach them. But if you're not very familiar, this might help you. We start by headings, and then we follow with regions, and then with paragraphs and lists and other elements. So once again, if you are new to this, if you want to teach accessibility, but you haven't done so before, the topics may help you kind of build your flow, the flow of your teaching. Now, what's within the modules apart from the topics? Competencies are previously required skills for both instructors and students. So once again, coming back to the developer example, if you want to develop accessible content, we assume some knowledge of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is required for you to actually take courses based on the curriculum. If you're going to teach accessibility, so if you're an instructor and you want to teach how people with disabilities use the web, we assume one of your previously acquired skills would be how to relate on how to interact with people with disabilities. So basically, you can use these competencies to check if a student or instructor could be suitable for a specific course. Learning outcomes. These are what a student should know and should be able to demonstrate after course completion. So these are basically the core section of the curriculum. You can use them either to build your teaching or to compare between different proposals. We have set of learning outcomes based on how people with disabilities use the web. We also have different learning outcomes about different coding techniques. So you can go check them and decide if a proposal suits your needs. And if it not, you can actually point them to this set of learning outcomes that we have and say, hey, this is the WAI curricula, and I would like to have extended coverage on, for example, how people with disabilities use the web. We've just talked about the topics to teach, so this is just for you to build your teaching sequence. The ideas to assess knowledge are actual ideas that you can include to assess knowledge acquired by students. We have ideas along the lines of having students use an assistive technology to navigate the web, but also we have ideas about students building their own website with accessibility in mind, including structural components and images and graphics and text alternative for those elements. So if you're new to accessibility, we really encourage you to go through these ideas. These are going to help you build your assessment methodology. The teaching resources are the recommended readings and materials for the courses. These are mainly W3C WAI resources. Now, in the topic, we have once again learning outcomes and ideas to assess knowledge. But we also have the teaching ideas for topic. These are more detailed teaching strategies. So, for example, when it comes to show how assistive technologies interact with the different types of web content, you could just have a theoretical explanation of how, different screen readers or different assistive technologies read different pieces of content, or you could actually demonstrate practically what it means. You could use an assistive technology yourself if you feel confident with that, or you could just have a video showing somebody using that assistive technology. These are the teaching strategies, and yeah, we really recommend you to have a look at them, because if you are new to this, they are going to give you some very valuable hints on how to teach accessibility. The first of the curricula, the Introduction to Web Accessibility, introduction modules, that's already available. And as I said, it's already published in the W3C website. We're going to get to that just later on. I'm going to give you all the details about the website and how to get there. So it has 5 modules. We're basically setting the foundations for accessibility. Everybody is advised to take these modules or courses based on these modules to actually get an understanding of what accessibility means, what it implies, and about the different strategies. So the first module is called What is Web Accessibility? And we introduce real stories of people with disabilities. We encourage course creators to bring in real people with disabilities to class. If they cannot bring in real people, we invite you to use videos that are on the web, actually demonstrating how people with disabilities interact with the web. Some of them have been made by people with disabilities themselves. And this module also defines accessibility and its related terminology. The second module, People and Digital Technology, explains the different barriers and features of accessibility and also gives you a picture about the different adaptive strategies and assistive technologies that people use to interact with the web. Also, it defines the relationship between accessibility and other disciplines, such as usability and user-centered design. The third module, Business Case and Benefits, gives you a perspective on the benefits of accessibility in an organization and also helps you create your own business case if you need that for your organization. The fourth module, Principles, Standards, and Checks, gives you an introduction to the principles and standards developed by W3C and gives you some easy checks that you can perform just to get a quick perspective about the accessibility of your interface of your website. So maybe checking the titles or maybe checking the headings or the text alternatives will give you a first idea about how far you've come with accessibility when you've built your website. And the fifth module, Getting Started with Accessibility, provides you with different strategies, planning, structuring, organizing accessibility when it comes to including that in your organization, and also speak about roles and responsibilities within the team and remediation strategies for when it comes to including accessibility in an existing project. So, which kind of courses could arise from these modules? I'm thinking about a lecturer who wants to teach accessibility and probably wants to include real people or call their local disability organization. I'm sure they will be willing to help you out with this if you really approach them and say, hey, I need somebody who can demonstrate their use of the web. I'm thinking about accessibility consultants such as myself. I've been providing actually this kind of training myself for many years as I have a disability myself. So I was using my, in particular, screen reader, and I was teaching the concepts, and I was, defining accessibility and teaching the strategies and the organizing plans that we underline here. And I did that myself. So students fortunately got the perspective of somebody with disabilities, but also got the concepts that they needed to learn in order to get their foundations. I also learned when I was researching for this curricula, I learned myself about different types of disabilities that I wasn't even aware of. So, somebody learns something every day. So that's definitely something you can gain from these modules. The next part of the curricula, the developer modules, will be available shortly. This is an almost final draft, and we plan to have this available by early 2021. We have 7 modules here. We talked about page structure and semantics, and that basically goes, as we were explaining before in the examples, about headings, how to code them, regions, paragraphs, lists, basically all the HTML elements that provide a cohesive page structure. Navigational menus, we explain how to code the menus in an accessible way. We explain how to mark them up and how to nest the corresponding menus and submenus if they exist. Also, images and graphics talks about the different types of images within accessibility and gives you perspectives about how to write alternative text for images. Tabular information gives you the perspective about types of tables that exist in web accessibility and also explains how to relate the header and data cells by using coding techniques. Forms and controls gives you an idea about how to label the different form controls that exists and also provides you some instructions about how to provide feedback when it comes to timing suggestions or when it comes to error suggestions from a developer's perspective. Custom widgets will teach you how to build known standard widgets from an accessibility perspective. So we always recommend to use standard elements as much as you can, but there are certainly occasions where you just can't use them. So what happens when we have known standard components? There is WAI area and there is JavaScript techniques that we explore here in this module so that you can actually build your own accessible custom widgets. And the next module, the dynamic content module, gives you a perspective of all of these together. We will discuss structure, semantics, navigation, focus and keyword management, and notifications and updates, but not just for custom widgets or for static pages, but also for rich applications such as web-based email client or a spreadsheet. or a website that is really crowded with some auto-updating components such as newsfeed or maybe a stock market or a chatbot or whatever. So these are basically the modules that we have here. We're thinking about web developers who may benefit from courses based on those modules. Also, accessibility consultants can train organizations or developer teams in a specific organization based on these modules. They're going to be available early 2021. Now, the designer modules is an early draft. We hope to have this available sometime in 2021. And this time we will focus more on visual design. Maybe a UX design could take courses based on these modules. And we will start with layout and structure. So structure is not only about coding headings, but also making the layout apparent for everybody and making the different sections of the website distinguishable. We will give advice about navigation and orientation, where to place the different menus, how the different navigational components need to look like from a visual perspective and also from a usability perspective. Colors, fonts, and graphics will deal with different ways in which we can use color to transmit information, to communicate information, and how we can provide different alternatives to color when it comes to information. Also, we will going to be discussing font sizes and contrast ratios and how to include graphics in a website so that they are accessible from the very beginning of the process, from the design phase. We'll also have guidance about forms, instructions, and feedback. So not just from the coding perspective, but also how we can design a form that is understandable by everybody and which kind of instructions or feedback we need to provide so that people can actually get the questions right and can actually answer them without frustrations. That's some designer's perspective as well. Now, the author's curricula, it's also an early draft, and we plan to have that also during 2021. And we are expecting that people authoring content would benefit from courses based on this module. But when saying authoring content, people or activities related to authoring content, we're not just focusing on somebody who writes a website or somebody who writes a blog or something like that. We're basically thinking about every one of us. When we are posting to a social network or when we are creating a pool with these pooling tools that are so common these days, we're actually authoring content. We're putting content together so that the world can see it and interact with it. And this is a great responsibility, as it is also a great power for all of us. Now, these modules will once again focus on headings and structure, but in this case, they will teach you how to write good text for headings. So, for example, putting the most relevant information at the very beginning of the heading will make easier for people to understand what you want to communicate. Navigational cues. So imagine when you're writing some documents and you sometimes say, as said above, we've discussed this and that. I'm doing this myself, as said above, or as said earlier or something. But you know the idea. So instead of saying said above or said earlier, you could just point to the specific section where it was said. As said in the introduction, we are going to discuss this and that. As said in the summary, we're going to provide information about this and that. So actually providing cues for people to make it easier for them to find the content. It's also a responsibility that falls under the author's perspective. Alternatives for images, graphics, and multimedia. We've been discussing text alternatives in the developers and in the design curricula, but it is actually here in the author's curricula where it gets really important, because you can imagine sometimes yourself when writing or when posting to a social network, you just put a photo without a text alternative. And nowadays you can, in many platforms, you can put the text alternative yourself, but you have to know certain techniques. So for example, what do I need to describe based on the type of images? Do I need to provide a little description of what's in there? Probably yes, if it is a piece of text. You want to provide actually the full text in plain text. So these techniques we're going to deal with in these modules, how to do that, how to provide accurate descriptions for everybody. Tables and data representations is another planned module that we have, and we will discuss how to structure the information. So not just coding the table, so not just making it apparent visually, but just, is it the table the best approach that we could have to structure this information? Is it the best way in which we can communicate what we want to communicate? We're going to give techniques to discern about when or when not to use tables and how to use them from an author's perspective. Forms, instructions, and feedback. Once again, if you are thinking about putting a pool together and using a tooling pool, you have to write the questions properly so that they're understood. You have to provide clear hints for people to discern and to determine what they need to answer. Now, if we want to put this together, we've been discussing mainly role by role, but let's say we have a team in which everybody does a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So you may develop your website, but then you may need to also write the news. And when it comes a time for the design, you may also be asked to provide some design hints so that the project can continue and the website can be redesigned. So let's say one practical example. So let's think about text alternatives. We've been discussing those before. Maybe the text alternative for the logo of the website is something that the design knows really well because they've been designing that logo. They know what they want to communicate with that. So if the designer thinks about the alternative and provides the text alternative actually in the design phase, that's going to help the developer code the text alternative much better because they already know what they needs to put there, what it needs to be in there. For example, if we have an image button, such as a print button or a search button or a save button, the developer, as it is a very functional aspect of the user interface, may know what to put in there. If it's clear that it is a search, then we can just put search in the text alternative. But when it comes to an image that somebody has uploaded in a piece of news, it's the author who really knows what they want to communicate. So the responsibility there would rely on the author side. Also, a little bit of tips and tricks for you to create courses that we think are important. Involve people with disabilities. It's the essential part, I would say, of this project. So we're trying to communicate that actually everything we do with regards to accessibility will have an impact on people with disability. So as soon as we can get this information about how people with disabilities interact with the web, the better we're going to be able to first understand the issues and the challenges, and then later on to provide the accessibility remediations if we are dealing with an existing project, or to include accessibility in the design phase, which would be the ideal thing and the most recommended thing, actually, so that they can use the web efficiently and comfortably. Communicate the why, sorry, not just the way, word for way, but not this case. So communicate the why and the how. The why is it important? Headings are important because they communicate the structure of the website and because they help assistive technology users to actually navigate through the different parts of your website. But also communicate the how I need to code headings, how I need to code regions. So making an emphasis on why it is necessary to code certain aspects will give students a much stronger foundation and a much stronger motivation to actually pursue their goals with accessibility. Make your teaching accessible. That may sound like an obvious thing, but it's always good to remember. We need to make sure that all the materials are accessible. For example, that when you put something on the screen, you speak it out loud so that everybody can follow you, either if they can see the screen or not. Also, you may make sure that you have captions if you're going to provide some spoken materials or some multimedia content. So basically making sure that everybody would be able to follow you on your courses. That's also a very important thing to take into account. Now, how to get involved with us? If you are interested in this resource and you want to get involved, there's several ways you can do this. First is actually checking what's already available. We have the first curricula, the introduction, already available in W3C website, and you can head over to w3.org/WAI/curricula. You're going to find the introduction, and very soon you're also going to find the developer modules. Now, this is the latest version published. This has been already endorsed by the group, and you're encouraged, and we are also very happy if you can point people to this and you can share this resource. Next one is what we call the editor's draft. This is a draft. This may be evolving through time, and this might not be very accurate since it's not been endorsed by the group. So this is kind of more unstable, kind of like a beta software or something, right? If you wanna put in that analogy. And this is at WAI-curricula.netlify, which is netlify.com/curricula. You can actually have a look at this editor's draft, but it's not something we recommend you share with people unless you state clearly that this is a draft, right? Because this is not, as I said, it's not been endorsed, it's not yet published. So yeah, just share it with caution and making sure that everybody understands that it is a draft. Now, in those two resources, you're going to find ways to get in touch with us, either by email or via the GitHub repository that we're using to develop this resource. Now, let me just before closing and just quickly mention some already existing, actually one already existing implementation. WAI have developed a free online course that is a MOOC, and we have developed that in conjunction with UNESCO, and also we've invited several expert trainers from different organizations around the world. So we really encourage you to take this course. Actually, I encouraged my wife to take this course, and she did that, and she is very happy with that, especially because she now knows what I'm working at. So that's that's something that might sound a little bit funny, but now seriously, we really recommend you to take this course. This is already available. If you head over to w3.org/WAI, you're going to get information about this course. Thank you very much for listening. It's been a pleasure to be here with us. This is Stadio Montalvo. My email address is tmontalvo@w3.org. So feel free to just get in touch if you have some questions, follow-up questions, or issues with the resource. As I said, it's been a pleasure. Thank you all, and bye-bye.